Great. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming to the seminar today. We're going to, just for your awareness, we'll take some photos of the seminar that we published on the webpage. Just let me know if you don't want to be included in the photos. And then I also want to acknowledge our sponsors, Fields Institute, Faculty of Arts and Science, and Google DeepMind is helping us to host these seminars. So we're grateful for their support. It's my pleasure today to introduce Matthias Tangemann. He did his PhD at the University of Tübingen under Matthias Bethke, and he's working at the intersection of human vision, computer vision, and machine learning. He's doing his postdoc here. He's supervised by Sven Dickinson, Dirk Bernhard Walter in psychology department here at U of T, Kaleem Siddiqui in the CS department at McGill, and Zygmunt Pislow at UC Irvine in cognitive science. So he spans a lot of different areas, and we're excited to hear him tell us about his work. So please join me in giving Matthias a warm welcome.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you all for coming. Maybe as a note when I start, feel free to interrupt me if you have questions, especially regarding to understanding. I think that's easier than keeping them at the end. Okay, so my talk is about linking motion and objectness, which has been the focus on my PhD, on which I've continued a bit here and going to extend during the postdoc. So in general, I'm very fascinated about the human visual system, which in a way that seems effortless to us is solving very complicated problems. And one is basically making sense of all the measurements that the visual system gets. So here it's a photograph, so it's nicely rectangular. In the human visual system, it's not even that. It's just a big array, just a big pile of measurements that somehow need to be organized in the representation of the scene that we have. And as soon as we color it, it gets easy. So you can detect, okay, there's two avocados. We can see which pixels go together. You can get a rough idea of the depth, that there's maybe a surface, and lots of information is actually inferred from these measurements in a way that feels very effortless to us. And so I'm very fascinated about this capability, and in my work I'm using computer vision as a tool to understand better what computation is driving this capability of human visual. So there is a branch of psychology called Gestalt psychology, who's thought about this question for quite a while, for 100 years. Maybe some of you have at some point stumbled upon the so-called Gestalt principles, which has been formulated by this direction, that basically describe or give rules of thumbs how the human visual system tends to group elements in the scene. So there's a long list of principles. For example, proximity here. The human visual system tends to group these dots in pairs here because the closer ones are assumed to belong together. The same goes for you have similarity of color or other image features. The visual system tends to group these together. And then common fate is my favorite that I've worked on a lot, which basically says whatever moves together belongs together. Beyond these grouping rules, Gestalt psychologists have been very interested also in objectness. So what makes an object an object? Here in these examples, although it's not natural images, nothing that we've seen before, it's pretty clear what's the foreground and what's the background in these images. So I guess most would agree that the red part here is the foreground objects, or here that somehow these lighter stripes are on the foreground in front of a darker background. Although when just looking at the image, both possibilities would actually make sense, but somehow the human visual system decides for the lighter ones. And in this case, the cue that gives rise is the parallel contours here. Because usually in the statistics of natural scenes, when two things are parallel, it's usually not random, it's non-accidental, as Gestalt psychologists would say, but things are parallel because they belong to the same thing. And that's why the human visual system has this cue. And then beyond mapping out all these cues, collecting all these principles, one very fundamental conceptual property of Gestalt psychology is this idea that vision goes beyond what we actually measure. So when we see an occluded object, like this elephant in this case, the human visual system can infer that we actually see an occluded elephant and we know it continues behind the occluder. So somehow the visual system is taking the measurements of what is actually seen in the scene, and comes up with an interpretation of the scene that explains these measurements, but extends beyond the measurements, for example, by filling in what is occluded. And also one very nice demonstration of these principles is this one where you tend to see like a white triangle-like shape occluding these black contours, although in the image there's not even a full contour here, but somehow the visual system sees this shape or interprets the visual input as having this shape here. Yeah, so in my work, I look at Gestalt psychology from a more computational angle. So what Gestalt psychology mainly has done is coming up with these demonstrations, with these rules, but what we are missing still is like a good understanding of the mechanisms that give rise to this principle. So how does the brain actually implement these mechanisms? And also how do these mechanisms extend from these very simple demonstrations to actual natural scenes, to natural photographs? And the idea here, or the hope, is that with the tools that we have from AI now, which are able to, for example, to recognize objects in natural images, that we get a new angle in looking at this problem and a new set of tools to better understand the computation that's happening. But at the same time, the connection between AI and human vision also goes the other way. So there's lots of studies still show differences in human vision and in computer vision, and aspects where human vision is still doing better. And so there's hope that from human vision we will also get some inspiration to build better AI systems in the future. So it's an interconnected relationship. So in the first project I'm going to talk about, we were basically interested in how do people learn these rules. And people experimenting on infant vision have come with an experimental paradigm to probe the perceptual organization in infants, where you basically take like a 2-month-old baby, set it in front of a display like the above, and usually these people build like actual physical scenes of these type of objects, where all of us would agree that we see some triangle that's occluded by a bar. So you would sit infants in front of the screen until they get bored, and then afterwards you would show two alternative test displays. One would be the complete triangle, one would be the broken triangle. And a very stable effect is that infants look at what they perceive as more dissimilar, because that's less boring. So if infants perceive a complete triangle here, they would look at this stimulus more, because that's more dissimilar, and the other way around. And what you can show is that very young infants actually don't perceive this complete triangle, but rather this broken up form, and are not able to complete the form. So that's a capability that emerges only during the first year of life. But curiously, as soon as you start moving the triangle behind the occlusion, infants are able to perceive the entire triangle as one. So using motion as a cue, using common fate as a cue, is effective a lot earlier than other of these Gestalt principles, which led to the conclusion, or this idea in cognitive science, that motion is one of the central cues that infants use to learn how to group the world into objects. And also has led to this notion of a spell key object after one of the researchers who has worked a lot in this field.
Yeah, it's out of curiosity. So, like, one alternative hypothesis would be that the infants just see a bunch of triangles in the first year of their life, so that it's not surprising anymore. Do they control for that?
Yes, they tested it with all kinds of objects. So with rods and other objects. And it's, I think it's, you can conclude that it's not the particular shape. Although, of course, there might be some effects. For example, faces are processed very differently by the human visual system. So faces are somehow special because they're so common, especially as an infant. The main thing you see is faces all the time.
And then is there kind of what's the thinking on whether this is like fine tuning on what they see versus just general cognitive development?
That's a question that's always hard to answer. So if you have a capability that you only observe at a certain time point, you cannot conclude whether it has been learned or whether it just needed time to develop and would have developed even without any visual input. So it's hard to dissociate these two. And we can't really conclude, and there's big fights over this. So people in cognitive science tend to get very emotional about this debate. There are some other species that suggest, for example, when humans are very unfinished when they're born. There are other species that can do a lot more when they're born. I mean, many species can walk like hours after they have been born.
I remember some study about kittens with like learning to detect like right angles or not the environment.
Yeah, but also with kittens, there have been experiments where kittens have been reared head fixed in an environment where certain orientation is completely missing, and you could show in the brain that the neurons are missing. So there is some. So this suggests learning. There's one team of researchers that are experimenting on chicks, and chicks basically with very little training, after a week or so, they can do object recognition from. So they have pose invariance, basically more or less without learning. It's pretty tricky to make any progress here. The idea is, I think the dominant idea is that this reliance on motion cues and also depth cues to some degree might be baked in a way, but that many of these patterns, of the static patterns, like this continuation patterns, are learned from these cues. But it's hard to dissociate.
Are there any studies on adults who have their vision restored or corrected? They were blind and then their vision was restored and they can communicate what they're seeing?
Yes, there's one. I mean, it's not adults. There's one group so Pawan Sinha at MIT is doing that with children in India, where they have programs. There are some defects of the visual system where you could operate.
Yeah.
But in many regions of the world, in some regions of India, it's not done directly after birth, and they have a program where they basically go through India and restore vision with this operation, and then while they're at it, do experiments and ask them what they see. And it seems that the trajectory of development is similar but faster.
Faster?
Yeah. So
when they're older? Or when they're infants?
No, when they're older.
Oh, interesting.
It could be because they have a notion of objects from interacting with the world and other senses. It's that idea. I'm not sure whether this works at any age. So these kids have been around 6 to 8. Yeah. I mean, there are some people that are born blind, and where the parts of the brain that usually do vision actually end up doing other stuff because they are not used for it. So they get used for other things. And I think then I'm not sure whether you can still learn vision then. I mean, the brain can learn pretty long. Also, people that have a stroke in some region can still restore lots of capabilities by other brain areas jumping in. So there is some flexibility.
Well.
Okay. Yeah, but so one thing that most people would agree with in cognitive science is that motion is somehow important to learn about objects, and motion is a cue that's closely tied to what it means to be an object. And in this project we worked on implementing this principle as a learning principle, as an unsupervised learning principle in computer vision, together with a a bunch of colleagues at Tübingen and at Amazon. So what we wanted to do, the setup, we had videos, in this case were fish, that can be observed as moving. And these videos is the input that the algorithm will see during learning. And we wanted to learn exactly this compositional scene representation, where a scene is made up of a background and varying number of fish. And importantly, like this core principle from Gestalt psychology, we want the algorithm to learn, even if there are occlusions, that fish are always complete. And then in the end, what we want to build is a generative model that we can use to generate novel scenes. A direction in computer vision that was very popular, it feels like ages ago, but it was just 3 years, was object-centric learning. And the idea was to use autoencoders for this type of learning problem. So in a regular autoencoder, most of you have probably seen this before, start with an image, map it to a representation, and then map the compact representation back to the image and minimize a reconstruction loss. In object-centric learning, the idea is to have a set-like representation that has not a single vector, but multiple vectors, so-called slots, and then reconstruct the image in a compositional fashion from these slots. So in a way, baking in a prior into the architecture that gives the machinery to present objects individually. And then the idea is from that, when trained as a regular autoencoder, it should learn to compose the scene. This tended to work on scenes like this, on like these very simple toy scenes. So here Genesis does a very good job. I mean, one effect that you have, and I think it still is in many papers, that only the algorithm that's presented in this particular paper is doing well. And the same here. And so Genesis learns a good decomposition of the scene, but also you can see in the other methods, although they're not working that well in this particular setting, that they're somehow picking up on the objects. But the bigger problem has been that these type of systems have not been able to work on scenes that are more complex than these toy scenarios. And so one question was, how can we go to actually natural scenes with this type of system? And so the proposal we made is a model built from multiple parts. So we start with a motion segmentation algorithm. There we just used an off-the-shelf unsupervised motion segmentation algorithm. Basically implements this assumption from inference vision we can detect objects, segment objects when they're moving. And then we use this motion information to basically restrict the training loss, the reconstruction loss of the autoencoder to the relevant regions. So in this crop here, for example, we know this green region is moving, so it has to be an object. For this gray region, we know it has to be in the background. And here we also, in this example, the motion segmentation detects another moving region that has a slightly different motion pattern, so something else has to be going on here. We don't get a depth ordering, so we don't know which occlude what. So the only thing that we can say for sure, in the green region, we definitely know we have our object. And for the other regions, we cannot make a clear prediction of what the model should do, so we don't apply any loss here. But other than that, we're basically using a standard autoencoder only with this restriction of the loss. We're doing the same for the background model that's supposed to learn the backgrounds. And then in the end, we put everything together in a scene model. So from the background model, we can sample a background. From the foreground model, we can sample any number of fish that we want. And the parameters we still have to learn there is a distribution over the number of objects and positions, in a way. Yeah?
The mask loss, like you have the ground truth fish, like in those original frames, you don't have the full fish, right? So how do you supervise it?
So we only have the motion segmentation only segments the visible area of the fish, and we don't have the ground truth for how it continues.
Okay.
And And actually, the interesting part is if you don't force the model to do anything and let that fill in anyhow, it learns to complete the fish. So we tried with different augmentation schemes to enforce it. But what's happening in a way is that the easiest way for the model to explain what's going on here is to reconstruct a complete fish, because this not only explains this scenario, but also other cases where the fish is fully visible.
Why didn't it reconstruct the blue one, for example? Like, is it just because the red fish takes up more of this crop?
No, here because for this crop we exclude the blue region from the loss.
Okay.
So the motion segmentation tells us there's a different object there. There's a different motion pattern. So we don't exactly what's going on there, whether it's background or foreground, whether there's an occlusion happening or not. And we just set the loss to 0 here, and let the model basically in-paint whatever the model wants to do, and don't allow it for anything. And the interesting part is that this is sufficient for the model to learn to actually complete fish. So we tried augmentation schemes to enforce it, but we were surprised a bit as well as it works even.
So you don't have a loss on the region you're in-painting?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, that's different. Okay.
Yeah. So we mask the loss and only apply the reconstruction loss in these areas where we're sure what's going on from the motion segmentation, and all other regions we don't enforce a particular loss.
So sorry, another question. So that also works when the input video is, so in this input video the blue fish is always in front.
Mm-hmm.
But what if, like in some later frames, the red fish goes in front of the fish? That would still work. The scheme.
Yeah. So we don't know the true depth ordering here.
Yeah.
And essentially that's the thing that the model has to learn, whether there's an occlusion happening, so like in this case, and paint in the remaining fish, or whether the depth order is reversed, that there is another object but it's part of the background. And so the model that we're learning here, it's basically an image based, it's an appearance model. So there's no motion model at this stage. That's why these depth order changes don't matter. So that's here. So when we probe this model, so these are the actual reconstructions that we would get from a model for like different occlusion levels. This model actually succeeds in always constructing the complete fish to pretty heavy occlusion levels. It tends to work quite well, and also masking out the background. So it's really learning this isolated object. And then when putting that together, we can generate novel scenes of this aquarium scene, which at the time was very good visual quality. But I mean, now we have diffusion models and everything, so that's not quite state of the art anymore. But one very interesting aspect of this model is that we can actually intervene on the scene generation. For example, since we have this compositional representation of the individual objects, we can, for example, move around individual objects. We can exchange individual fish by a different fish, or exchange the background while keeping everything the same. So there's a very natural control over this scene model that we have displayed. Yeah. So in a way, as a summary of this project, the motion information allowed to scale this reconstruction-based object-centric learning to more interesting scenes. We also get this control of the scene generation. One critical factor that came about, we need a good motion segmentation model to start with. This was the assumption we were building on. Maybe as an outlook, as I mentioned, this was one of the earlier projects I did in my PhD, and computer vision is moving extremely fast. But this idea of using motion to learn about the world is still relevant. For example, there's very nice work, if you're interested in direction, from Stanford, where actually a masked autoencoder is used to reconstruct a second heavily masked frame, where just a few patches are given a full first frame, basically inferring the motion of of the patches and using that to copy the information. And in a similar way, you can use this model to interact with a scene. For example, if you give an image as a first frame and then move a patch belonging to this banana, for example, to a different location, and this model learned to basically only move the banana in this case. So also here, this motion-based learning principle results in a composition of the scene into objects. Yeah, so this would be the more recent implementation of this idea. Yeah.
I have a question about the two previous slides. I think I didn't get how actually the image, if you have a background and multiple objects, how do you predict some alpha value? So how do you know, let's say you want to move one object, occlude another object, how do you know which one is in front? What's predicted actually? Is it just colors and you just, how are they?
So our scene model basically predicts depth ordering, and then we overlay everything in the model. So it's in a way it's a dead leaves model where we paste stuff on top of each other, and the alpha value is in a way predicted by the object model, but it's binary. So we have a fully transparent background and a fully opaque foreground, and then we just paste stuff on top of each other.
So with the editing you were showing, you didn't show, I guess, if you would move, if you would include, what would happen? How do you determine which one is in front? Let's say you put one of the fishes down single object. Which one is in front?
So in this case, it would be random depending on which one was sampled first during the process, but it's possible to reverse it during sampling. So you can change the depth ordering of the objects.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's exactly also what is enabled by this complete representation. So prior models only represented the parts of objects that were currently visible, which means you can't move them around. Because, for example, if it's only partially visible, you only would move around this part. Okay, so far this project used an approach to using DNNs for vision science, which is most similar to this toolbox, which is one way how DNNs are interesting to vision science or in psychology. So we can use the power of deep learning to implement this ideas from cognitive science in a way that scales to natural scenes. But this is not the only way how DNNs can be used usefully in vision science. And another possibility to apply DNNs is more like rats are used in neuroscience. And here, another example is, although diffusion models and generative models have gotten a lot better, you still get these free handlings and so on. So somehow we're still not there at a proper human-like object-centric representation, even in state-of-the-art models. So using model systems in neuroscience is a long tradition. So I think a mouse or a rat is probably the most prominent examples. Fruit flies used a lot. They simplify experimentation, so you can run experiments on rats that you can't do on humans, either for practical or ethical reasons. They're sufficiently similar to humans when it comes to, for example, the neuronal mechanisms or hierarchical visual processing. So you have aspects that you can study using an animal model, but they're not the same in every aspect. For example, so we have a phobia. We only see sharp in the central portion of the visual field, so we have to move around our eyes to see the scene sharp. For example, mice and rats don't have a phobia. And so if you're interested in eye movements, then you shouldn't use a mouse because it's not a good model for that. And DNNs can actually be regarded in a very similar way. So they simplify experimentation a lot. I mean, you can perfectly observe noise-free every neuron in the DNN. You don't have memory effects. So one very annoying thing when you run experiments with human subjects is that they remember what they've seen a few trials back, and you always have to fight against that. In DNNs, you can perfectly control this. So they simplify experimentation a lot. they're similar to humans. For example, we have high-level visual processing that's very good. We have DNNs that can label scenes, that can recognize objects, and all these capabilities that we have by now. But like an animal model, like a rat, they're not the same in every aspect. So, for example, neurons are highly extracted. If you care about the biology, about the neural information processing, you wouldn't use a DNN as a model. And then also several models have restrictions in terms of task, so different models might be suitable for each task. And so one important line of works when using DNNs in this way is figuring out the similarities and the dissimilarities of pre-trained DNNs for any task in humans to better know for which capabilities these DNNs are actually a good model. And this is more the spirit that we looked at in this project, and we were still interested in common fate and object segmentation, but now looking at which of these many motion models that we have in computer vision is actually similar to human visual perception. And the project here is more in the direction of motion segmentation, which I find very interesting because it even shows in adults that motion is still a very dominant cue that is used for segmentation. So here in this picture, an animal is hiding, camouflaged animal, which is hard to spot if you just have visual experience. I mean, maybe some of you observed it, maybe some of you don't. But once I play the video, and as soon as there's motion in the image, it's pretty easy to see where the animal is. And maybe some of you know going to the zoo and having these cages where it says there are 20 animals in this cage, and you stare down this cage and you can't see a single one, but as soon as they move, you see them. So motion is a super powerful cue. And vision scientists, in a way, have come up with examples of perfect camouflage. So here I have to quickly change because Google optimizes videos when you upload them, which destroys the effect, unfortunately. So here we have a display of random dots. There, when you look at the single frame from this video, it's completely random. So you can take any frame, and probably no one is able to detect anything that's going on. However, as soon as you play this video and you have motion going on, most of you are probably able to recognize this giraffe that's moving through the video. And so vision scientists have looked at these at random dot stimuli for a while. So the question we have been asking in our project now is there any computer vision model that is a good model for this capability? And the critical part is the inference of the motion. So your model has to be able to see motion information in these random dots, because otherwise you will have a hard time segmenting these stimuli. And so we compared two types of models. So one is deep optical flow models. So we chose a pretty wide selection from like the earliest flow nets to the most recent transformer-based optical flow models, and compared it to an alternative approach. It's called a motion energy model, which has been very popular in human vision and has been able to predict the firing of some motion-related neurons in primates. And we used both types of models in like the following benchmarking setup. So we started with a frozen optical flow or motion energy model, which we didn't train, where we just used the published weights and trained a segmentation model on top that, in this case, does this foreground background segmentation. And we train it on a data set of RGB videos of single moving objects that we generated. And so these videos are the only thing that's seen during training. And during testing, we test on both RGB videos from a test set, as well as the corresponding random dots. And of course, the textures are a lot different in both these examples with random dots versus RGB. However, the underlying motion patterns are exactly the same. So an ideal motion estimator would be invariant to changing the texture, just predicting the motion pattern, so that the segmentation model should perfectly generalize in this setting. So in the following plot, I'm exactly showing that, where in the x-axis we have the segmentation performance on clean videos, on the y-axis we have the performance on random dots. And here's all the optical flow models that we tested. They had varying success, so some transferred a bit to the settings of the random dots, but most of them actually cluster here in the bottom right, which especially the more recent optical flow models from the last years, which basically yield a more or less perfect segmentation on the clean videos, but don't transfer at all to random dots. And the interesting part from the human vision perspective was to compare this to the motion energy model, which was able to not perfectly achieve the performance on clean videos, but actually transfer pretty well. So this, and curiously, this has been achieved with like the original weights from like 25 years ago or even more. So this was very, very curious to see that in this specific setting, in this term of generalization, this old hand-fitted model still has something to offer compared to these optical flow models.
That's right. I'm not followed optical flow research recently. So do they use kind of low-level image features? Is that why?
Yeah, usually what's happening, I mean, of course, there's different architectures have been used, but there's one mechanism that's used for the motion estimation is to, essentially the idea is compute a feature representation of two frames individually using like the same networks. It doesn't have to be very deep. And then compare features. So basically computing correlations between the features.
So basically you compute features. So
yes, in a way.
That it would generalize.
Yes. What this motion energy model is doing is a construction that is not completely unrelated, but the idea is a bit different. The idea is when you regard a video as a 3D volume, where you have x, y, and time, then a moving edge corresponds to a particular orientation in the space-time volume. And the more it's tilted, the faster the object is moving. And so by basically constructing filters that are responsive to these edges, you can detect motion as well. It can be related to this approach, but I think the critical difference here is that this this matching operation across time happens earlier in the model.
Honestly, I wonder if you just do style transfer first, then wouldn't it work better?
So
like essentially you have kind of different low-level features that like no like you try to compute low-level features from the dots, and of course it doesn't work, right?
Yes, so that's also our hypothesis. Why this model it's doing the motion computation, it's matching too late. So there's the matching here in this model happens after a single linear layer. So it's also doing a form of feature matching, but using a lot earlier features.
And also different features. Yeah, so what I'm saying is because like style transfer works really well, so I wonder if you just take like off-the-shelf style transfer.
Yeah, so in this setting I don't think so, because you can't do style transfer in the random dots, because a single frame doesn't give you any information. So you can't stylize a texture to a single frame.
Yeah, fair.
But exactly that seems to be the difference. What computer vision and has been doing differently from computational modeling people in human vision. Yeah, so we verified this using human participants that we showed the video and then asked which two shapes have been seen. Basically arriving at the same picture, that we had that none of the optical flow models was able to achieve the performance that humans were able to do, but the motion energy model provides enough information to explain human performance on this task. So in summary, we've seen that somehow state-of-the-art optical flow models, although they're doing very well on RGB videos, they don't seem to be a good model for the type of motion processing that's going on in humans. And a neuroscience-inspired model, although it's much older and a lot simpler, and is still a better model of the type of motion processing that's going on. And also the interesting part here is that this model actually provides now a link between like this low-level processing that's happening in the model, like the mechanism level, and this Gestalt level, this level of using common fate to see objects. Okay, so briefly, the last project, it's probably the most computer vision-like project I'm presenting, which we just submitted to CBPR. Also targeting motion segmentation, and now classical motion segmentation on the Davis dataset. Maybe some people have seen this dataset before. So classical computer vision tasks segment moving objects. And what people have been doing is exactly this two-stage approach that we've seen before. We start with a motion estimator. So Raft is a very popular choice. It's a bit dated by now, but many people are still using it, and then have some second stage, so some second DNN that's doing the segmentation. Lots of innovation has been going on there, so people have used like mask RCNN inspired networks first. Now everyone is doing transformers and detour-based stuff, or trying to integrate segment anything. But the basic setup is the same. We basically stack two neural networks on top of each other, and then to get the prediction, we run our input video through the entire stack. And one thing that human vision people have been wondering about for a long time is the fact that motion estimation and segmentation are actually not that sequential as it appears to be in this model. So it's clear you need to estimate motion first, and then you can detect the moving objects. But the interesting fact is that the opposite also holds. In many situations, you need segmentation to correctly estimate the motion that's going on. And here's a visualization of the example. For example, if you take this point A that's close to a moving object on the background, and you want to find the corresponding point in the next frame to estimate the motion. You have the true alternative, which is basically now only showing the background because the object moved away, versus a similar location, which is basically moved with the object. And in your feature representation, actually this patch probably looks a lot more similar to the original patch than the true background. And so somehow in this matching process, when matching features, you have to discard the moving objects and somehow learn what belongs to the surface where the point is on that you actually look at. And a similar argument holds for points that move out of the image or that get occluded in the next frame. That's impossible to find a correspondence. And so the only thing that you can do is reason about other points that are on the same surface and then copy motion information from there. So you can detect that this point basically belongs to the same object, and let's say this point. For this point, you can find a correspondence, and then you copy the motion that you inferred for this other point back to the original one. But this reasoning, this mechanism requires a notion of what belongs to the same object, so what belongs together. And so in a way, to correctly predict motion in these cases, you need at least a rudimentary form of segmentation information to make a correct prediction. And the interesting part is that optical flow models that we have nowadays do very well in these cases. So it seems to reason that they've learned some rudimentary form of segmentation, which means that when we stack networks in this way, we actually have a lot of redundant computations going on. So basically, this network, the optical flow network, infers the motion, but as a byproduct, some form of segmentation. We throw most of the segmentation away, only use the motion, and run it through a segmentation network again, which has all this machinery again to cluster this, to have an encoder and a decoder. And Yeah, and the idea behind this project is so human vision people have been wondering about this for a long time, how this circular computation is solved. But the prediction that you could make from there, and what we're looking at in this paper, is if you actually drop this two-stage paradigm and combine everything into a single network, you should be able to get away with a lot smaller neural network, because you can discard everything that's doing redundant computation. And so that's what we have been doing. So starting with the raft model that has been used by the other motion segmentation networks as well. So this network starts with exactly this feature matching stage, and then has recurrent update blocks that update the optical flow estimate in a couple of iterative steps. And instead of now using the final optical flow, it basically added a second recurrent update stream on top that's predicting the segmentation of the input stream directly from the internal representation of the optical flow model in parallel to this motion update stream. So in this model, we now have basically two parallel streams, one inferring the motion, the other one inferring the segmentation. And another nice aspect of this construction is that we can use the final upsampling to the full resolution. We can reuse this module from the original optical flow model. And the only thing we have to solve is basically clustering of the scene, the segmentation of the scene at the low internal resolution. This tends to work quite well. So here's a qualitative comparison of models. So we're getting a segmentation which is pretty good in natural scenes to segment the foreground objects, more or less matching the quality of other networks. But the interesting part is that we can do the same, so we reach roughly the performance of other networks, but with more than a magnitude fewer parameters. So the entire model that we built on top has like 1 million parameters, which is tiny compared to what other models have been doing. In the extreme cases of building SAM on top, adds like 500 million parameters. But this prediction that you can get away with a lot smaller network basically holds, verifying to some degree that actually this optical flow networks did learn some segmentation internally. Okay, so as a summary, this again is a very project that's very much on the computer vision side. Again, demonstrating this recurrent theme that motion and objectness are deeply interlinked, and that when we embrace this interdependence of both problems, we can build a lot more efficient models. Okay, as an outlook, what we've seen through all this project, DNNs are powerful tools that we can use to make progress in understanding human visions by using DNNs as tools or as model systems. And I think the big question that I've made some progress now for Common Fate, and what I'm extending to in my postdoc, is basically this question how to learn Gestalt principles from data, and expanding to other Gestalt principles beyond Common Fate. And I think it's a good time to do this because many interesting and capable models have been coming out. For example, it has been a good time for 3D models, for depth prediction models that have become very good in the recent years, being able to predict very plausible depth estimates even from line drawings. So they seem to capture some on the underlying processing. And also I'm quite excited about so-called world models that are coming out. So in this case, we see a video from NVIDIA Cosmos. Maybe some people have heard about this. Just basically a generated video, or its models that allow predicting what will happen next in a video given the action that the agent is doing, for example, lifting up. And I think these are very powerful training approaches to learn about the visual world, and I think it will be very exciting to see whether these type of training techniques lead to models that are more similar to human vision than what we have. With that, hoping to get to the next slide. I'm thanking all the amazing people I had the chance to work with, both my old lab in Tübingen, a new group here in Toronto now, and in Montreal and Irvine. Yeah, and thanks all of you for your attention.
Great, thanks, Matthias. This is really excellent. Any questions? I had a question. So how important do you think it is that our computer vision models match these aspects of the human visual system? Like, do we need models that, should we be trying to create models that would like detect motion from the random dots? Like, how important is low-level principles, being able to emulate these low-level principles of Gestalt psychology, and do like what like higher-level capabilities do you think these models would have if we could do that?
I think it depends a bit on the application area. So for motion, I think the most gains you get is efficiency. So current models are very capable on videos, but do very expensive computation for each frame. So if you need to run them in real time, I mean, it's possible given enough hardware, but if you're on a constrained setup, like a drone, for example, where you're on a limited energy budget, you can't do this approach. And I think there, the motion processing in the human visual system has lots of interesting ideas for inspiration, how to get more efficient. Actually, so this motion energy model has been used by, for example, by people that are doing drone racing, that are really working onto limited energy and computation budgets. So there, it might be interesting. There's other areas where human vision is definitely ahead of computer vision. For example, everything that has to do with robustness. I think humans still have an edge. The issue there is a bit, we don't know exactly how humans are so robust. So many people would assume that it has to do with the way how we perceive scenes in terms of this, not only perceiving what's actually there, but making this inference about the underlying factors of the scene, and even those that we don't see, but we don't know for sure. And that, of course, makes it a bit harder to apply it. And then one factor, and then there's situations, I mean, sometimes we want artificial systems to do things that humans can't do, or be more precise than humans. And there, of course, there's little to learn. But I think in terms of everything that has to do with motion processing or real-time processing under energy and compute constraints, I think there's a lot to learn from human.
Yeah, thank you.
It's probably a very related question, but I still wanted to ask it. So one internal, I don't believe the premise of what I'm about to ask, but anyways. So internally, when I look at the dots, I do feel like I see an object. But at the same time, like maybe actually it's not being processed in the visual system wholly, right? Maybe it's sent somewhere out the line. It's kind of what you said, like maybe I'm doing some inference, maybe I'm even like culturally conditioned to, because I watched cartoons and whatever, to see 2D animation and infer that this is kind of like a cartoon. So maybe it's kind of much more complicated than that, and that's why you shouldn't expect just optical flow to work with that.
Yeah, so in this case, so I think in this case we have a good answer, because people have worked on random dots for so long, and people have recorded the firing of motion-sensitive neurons in primates, like in monkeys, for these type of stimuli, and basically showed that the same type of rather low to mid-level neurons are active for the same stimuli. So I guess here we can make a good case that it's low-level processing, but I agree that in many situations it might go beyond this, because all the experience that we have, and also, like, I think it wasn't in the examples, but like the familiarity of objects also influences how we see the world. So there's some top-down effect of having familiar objects that influence how we see the world. So that's And maybe not in a random dot case, but in general, yeah, that's a factor that's definitely happening.
I'm much more relaxed about it now.